Thank you, Sue, and welcome everyone to this week's webinar called Our Clients' Past Need Not Foretell Their Future, Coaching to Our Clients' Attachment Styles. We are really honored, and I am really honored to be here today with my dear friend and a very special thought leader with the Institute of Coaching, Alison Whitmire. And we would love to hear from you to see who we have joining us. So please take a minute and say hello in the chat box. We always have an amazing array of folks that join us from all over the world. So good evening if you're in Europe, where I am, and good afternoon if you're in the US, or good morning wherever you are. So say hello, and we will get kicked off here in just a couple of minutes as we let people come in. We have a really large audience joining us today. So I am particularly excited about this webinar because I am have been working with Alison as part of the roundtables with the Institute of Coaching for the past 3 or 4 years. And she has really been an amazing support of the work we do here at the Institute. She and Jan Rybeck in the Washington, D.C. area created one of our first roundtables, and it has been super successful, kept it alive all during the pandemic, and has really created a really powerful coaching community in the region. And then, of course, when we went virtual, from people from all over the country and all over the world regularly join Alison's weekly or bi-weekly coaching conversations and coaching, they call them, what do you call them, Alison?
Together at Home.
Together at Home, that's right. Which has become
the second Friday of every month. Join us.
Which has just been so fabulous for us at the Institute. People find them so enriching. And, you know, it's not a small thing. When I look back on the roundtable program that we started a few years ago, and now, thanks to people like Alison, we have roundtables all across the world. And so we have a lot of gratitude for the work that she and Jen Rybeck and others have done to make it possible to have these live community discussion groups. But today we are particularly honored to have Alison because she's going to share with you some of her wisdom and knowledge in this particular area of coaching to clients' attachment styles. So if you're not familiar with Alison's background, let me just give you a little bit of a background because she is truly a thought leader in this space. She is a PCC accredited coach, the president of a company called Learning in Action, and a master WeQ practitioner. She's known as a thought leader in the emotional and relational intelligence space, and she's the originator of Learning in Action's We Intelligence methodology. As I said, she's a professional certified coach. She's a master WeQ practitioner and certified narrative coach. She serves on the faculty of David Drake's Moment Institute teaching narrative coaching and is certified in a number of different practice areas, including yoga, mindfulness meditation, breath work, and many other somatic modalities. So she is truly a thought leader in this space. And I am super excited that we were finally able to track her down and get her to be with us today. So without further ado, I just want to welcome you, Alison, and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. And I'm seeing the hellos in the chat box as they go by. Thank you so much for those who know me and are here and are saying a warm welcome. I'm grateful for you. And I'm really genuinely grateful, Jeff, for you, for your support, for the work that you have done and that the work that the IOC has done. You know, I feel like when the pandemic happened, like there was so much disconnection and kind of fear. And I feel like you and IOC were leaders in that space to fill a real need. And I'm feeling really grateful. So thank you.
Well, I feel the same way about you. So we are very honored to have you as part of our thought leadership collaboration here at the Institute.
Thank you.
And likewise, I'm seeing that people from all over the world are joining us. So, wow, amazing.
Yeah,
So
love.
without further ado, take it away.
I will do. Okay, so as you've heard, today's conversation is about coaching to our clients' patterns and attachment styles, and we'll talk more about what that means as we go. I'd like to start with a bit of a poem from Willard Stafford called Ritual to Read to Each Other, and it starts like this. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. So what's significant about that, and what is important about that, and oftentimes poets kind of capture something true in their poetry, and I feel like he's done that here. Other people do make patterns on us, which we'll be talking about. Other people do make patterns on us at a time for which we have no memory and no knowledge and no language and no choice. And when we are unaware of those patterns, then a pattern others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. And so the reason pattern detection is so vitally important for us coaches is to save our clients from living a life through a pattern that others made that they can't see. So today we're going to be exploring how we humans, all of us humans, are shaped by past relationships in ways that form patterns. We'll talk about how our first relationships impact not just our future relationships with others, but also our relationship with our own lives into adulthood. We'll talk about how clients' patterns show up in the challenges they bring and the narratives they use to articulate those challenges, and how that shows up in coaching, how we can detect them as their coach, and then how we can support our clients in loosening the grip of these patterns that they can't see, so that they can literally reclaim themselves, so that they can reshape themselves and not miss their star. So if you'd like the slide deck from today, by the way, you can get that at learninginaction.com/IOC webinar. You don't have to feel like you need to create screenshots or write notes. You can get a PDF of the whole slide series by going to learninginaction.com/IOC webinar, and Sue's kind enough to put that in the chat box for you to make that easy. So I'm going to speak for just like 10 minutes and talk about this idea of how we are shaped in relationship. And it's all as context for everything else that follows. And if you like this kind of thing and you're into neuroscience and you're into the psychology and even the degree of spirituality, then you're going to love this and want to sign up for the series where we go into this in more in depth. So before we get into this, like some theoretical concepts, it'd be good to like just land this a bit. And I'm going to ask you, everyone listening, all 416 people in this field that we're co-creating together, what is a relationship that has shaped you? Just reflect on that. What is a relationship that has shaped you? And how has it shaped you? So I can tell you, I've been very shaped by my dad. He was the rock of my life, most of my life. My relationship with him shaped how I view the world and how I view myself. I always knew my dad believed in me, always, inexplicably at times. And we learn from these early relationships whether it's a really positive relationship, it shapes us. And even if it was a distressing relationship, it can shape us. So we'll talk more about how that works. So we are literally, not just metaphorically, not just figuratively, we are neurobiologically, so psychologically, socially shaped by the relationships in our lives, and most profoundly by the earliest relationships in our lives. And if you love this, as I said, we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the series. And if you want to do some deep dive of your own, this image you see is based on the work of Dan Siegel and interpersonal neurobiology. And if you love the neuroscience of this stuff, you can check out Louis Cozolino's book. He has worked with Daniel Siegel, called The Neuroscience of Human Relationships. It is absolutely brilliant. The key points that I want to make, and this is an enormous body of work that we'll explore further in the series, is that relationships, if you look at this graphic here, relationships literally shape the structure of our brains. Different attachment patterns that we'll talk about in a bit shape the brain differently. And similarly, relationships, and you won't be surprised about this, relationships shape our minds, right? If you think back to that relationship that you identified when I asked the question, what relationship shaped you? They probably shaped your sense of yourself, your sense of what's possible, how you think, how you feel. They shape us. And here's the thing is we have been shaped in ways typically we don't know and can't see because it happened before we had language or memory or choice. So it turns out we are shaped in fairly predictable ways. And some of those predictable ways are reflected in this body of work called attachment theory. Now, I bet many, many of you know about attachment theory. And I'm going to give you a high-level overview of attachment theory because it's less important that you know all the details of it than that you know that it reflects a way in which we are shaped by others and into adulthood. So John Bowlby, a British psychologist in the 1950s and later extended by his protege Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main and others, were curious initially about why some children experienced separation anxiety and some didn't. So he got really, really curious about what is the difference and what is the relationship between a child and their parent. And that's what he examined. And this work of attachment theory has been reperformed and reperformed hundreds of times at this point and have gotten the same results, predominantly the same results, a very stable, robust body of work. And what they would do is to determine attachment patterns between a parent and a child, is they would put the parent and the child in some kind of small room that you'd have for a focus group with a two-way mirror. And the parent and the child would be invited in. The child's like maybe 2 years old. And they'd be invited to play and get to know the space and make sure everybody was happy and stable. And then they would introduce a stressor for the child, such as the mother leaving the room. So the mother would leave the room, and naturally that's distressing for the child. And then moments later, the mother would come back. And oftentimes, and I'm saying mother because typically this was done with mothers, what they would look for is how is the child relating to the parent after the stressor? Can the child use the parent to self-soothe, and after self-soothing, return to play. Do they turn toward the parent and self-soothe, or do they have another strategy or another approach or another response? And what they found were 4 unique attachment styles: secure, here, avoidant, anxious, and fearful, also called disorganized, also called fragmented, has a variety of names. The secure attachment was when the parent returned to the room and the child would turn toward their parent and be calmed enough to return relatively quickly to play and explore the world in the way children do. And other times, and that occurred about 50% of the time, other times the parent would come back into the room and the child would literally turn away from the parent. They would avoid the parent and have a very flat affect. And that became an avoidant attachment pattern. And in another instance, the parent would return and the child would cling to the parent in a way and not be able to return to play. And it was as if the parent returning didn't solve their stress. They weren't able to return to play. And the fearful attachment doesn't really have a patterning. It doesn't look a particular way. And it's believed that that's because the parent was the source of threat. And the child doesn't know what to do or how to compute that when they're drawn to the parent, but they're the source of threat. Fortunately, that only occurs about in the high single digits of the time. So that's a very quick overview of attachment. And so again, if you want to learn more about it, join us later. Here's what's important for you for today for attachment is an attachment pattern, and we all have one, is a function of how the child related to the parent in a time of stress, which is based on how they learn to relate to the parent, and how the parent had related to the child up to that point. And that's significant because part of what we're doing in a coaching relationship is modeling a secure attachment. And when our clients' patterns play out, it's important for us to see how the origin story of those patterns, so that we are relating to them in a particular way that allows us to connect with them and show more of themselves and be able for us to work with the patterns that arise as they arise. So we'll be talking much more about that. So as children, our first relationship with our primary caregivers becomes the model of relationships for us. In our little child brain, we think this is how relationships go. I can't trust my parent to be there. That's avoidant. I can't trust them to be there where I need them. I can't count to them. I'm going to have to count on myself. Or anxious, where like, I really need them, but they're not here when I need them. So it's the model of our relationship. And it turns out it's also a model of ourself and others. And we take these mental models that are developed in our earliest years of life into adulthood. And these mental models become our patterns of thinking, feeling, wanting, and relating that we really can't see. We just think this is how this is. This is how this goes. So if you'd like to learn more about that flyby, about how we're shaped in relationship and the detail of attachment theory, we're going to be teasing all of that out in this 3-part series we're going to start in January. And it's a 3 lecture series followed by 3, it says discussion groups, but are really going to be practice groups around how we learn to, based on a client's narrative, based on how a client articulates their challenges or whatever they're showing up to coaching with, how you can detect their pattern and then how to work with that pattern. Because when we work with our clients at the level of their patterning, we give them the chance to reclaim themselves. All other coaching is kind of whack-a-mole until we work with the pattern that underlies their experience. So I'll stop there for comments, questions, anything. And Jeff, I've just asked what's coming up for you or questions.
Well, I'll just suggest to folks that if they want to start putting questions in the Q&A box, that would be great. And just to reiterate that I am really excited about this opportunity, and I'm glad you already mentioned it early on, because it's really going to be an opportunity to take a deeper dive into our clients' relationship styles and how we as coaches can really tap into, I think it's getting, as you said, like below the surface of what the way our clients see the world. And that it's also an opportunity for us to look at our own attachment styles. I think one of the things I find interesting about your work, Alison, is that in similar kind of parallel to the way I was trained as a psychologist, one of the key things about the coaching dynamic is looking at how your pattern as a coach interacts with your client's pattern. And the two of them wind up either supporting a sense of safety and creating a possibility for breakthroughs, or they do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
They reinforce each other. So becoming aware of these kinds of patterns, where they came from, how to unearth them, how to look deeper. This is really what you're focused on, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
So
there was a question in the chat box on the price. And so the price of that series is up here on the slide. And Sue's going to put a link in the chat box on how you can get to that series.
It's also available on our website, so people can, it's already, if you just go to the institute.org.
Yeah.
So there are now a couple, you want to answer a couple quick questions before you move on?
How about you come on camera, Jeff?
Okay. I don't want to steal your thunder.
It's weird talking to disembodied voice.
That's true. So, but Alisa has a great question. How do you begin to identify attachment styles?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do in the rest. Yeah.
Do you want to give a hint?
Well, that's what the rest of the.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's what the rest of the conversation is about today. Yeah.
Let's see. Vicky is asking, why is the anxious style considered positive? That's an interesting question.
Oh, well, no, it's actually the positive. I think you might have been looking at model of self, and there's model of other. Let me put this back on the screen and you'll see. It's not necessarily like one's positive and one's not, but
right. Okay.
There's a model of self that is negative and anxious, and a model of other that is positive. Right. So that's the tension, is the model in avoidant, the model of other is negative, but the model of self is positive. And in anxious, the model of self is negative and the model of other is positive. So
yeah, because what you're talking about also is self-reliant, like the avoidant becomes a very self-focused.
Self-reliant.
Yeah, I've often in psychological circles, I hear it called the survivor in some cases. Right?
Well, the victim.
Victim and survivor.
For victiming. Yeah. And the focus actually isn't on the self. The focus is on the other. And we'll talk more about that.
Okay.
about how that shows up in narrative. Yeah.
There's another really good question, and I think it's from my friend Barbara Phillips, who's asking, is this kind of patterning always pre-verbal, or can the patterns emerge over long-standing destructive behavior from verbal onward? In other words, is it always early childhood, or is there other patterning that takes place over time?
Well, we're definitely shaped throughout our lives. And I don't know if Barbara said it or I saw it somewhere else in the chat flowing through. Trauma definitely affects our patterns. And we'll be talking about a trauma pattern.
Great.
Yeah.
I'll let you go forward then.
Okay. And I do want to address one piece of a question that I saw pop up in the chat, which is, is there a risk that our clients see us as their parents? And because that can be confusing when I talk about, when I use words like secure attachment in a relationship with a client. And if you're really interested in this, David Drake has done a lot of published work in the field of creating secure attachment with clients and the relationship between attachment theory and coaching. So there's a good body of work there. We're not trying to be anyone's parent. A secure attachment is simply about creating a secure base for which our clients can be themselves, and creating a safe haven in which they can try things and experiment, and they can show up fully as they are, and not hide any part of themselves. And so that's really, and us help them make meaning of themselves for themselves. Right. So that's what I mean by kind of being a secure attachment for our clients. It's a lot like coaching. So there is a handout for this next piece. You might be wondering what your own patterns are at this point. So I'm going to give you a chance to give them a look. So you won't know necessarily, oh, I'm avoidant, I'm secure, I'm right, but you'll get a sense of this. So here's an experience to give you a sense of what your patterns might be. Okay. And we've created this simulation to be a pointer. So imagine that the guy on the screen here is your client. He's a coaching client. And he's the CEO of a small private business. You've been coaching him for 4 months. He's talking to you in the video. So lean into this conversation as if it's real, and you know him and he knows you, and just track what goes on inside you. And then use the handout, and if you don't have the handout, you can just write this on a sheet of paper, to write as many sentences as possible. And if you don't write the sentences, you won't get the value of the work here. So write as many sentences as possible in the 10 lines of the handout, and we'll go from there.
Look, I appreciate what you do. I really do. And I genuinely like you as a person. But I am just not getting much value from our work together. And I get that you don't normally work with people like me. So maybe that's it. But we've been at this for a while now. And while I appreciate your efforts, not much has really changed. So I think maybe this is it. But I do, really appreciate you.
Okay. Intentionally triggering. So take a moment and write as many statements as you can, as quickly as you can. Don't think about it too much on your handout. And we'll give you just a minute to do that.
I just have to say I love this, Alison, because the first thing I had to do was think about breathing.
Right.
Okay, Jeff, you need to breathe.
Yeah. Just breathe. Yes, 1 sentence per line. Okay, so that's not, I recognize that's not nearly long enough. And if you want to keep going, please keep writing. So we're going to revisit that at the end. And if you want to take a minute, just keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. We'll revisit all of this at the end. And if you're interested in this whole idea of how do patterns form, you can find that at the learninginaction.com/IOC webinar. We have a little infographic there. So we have been at Learning in Action looking at how professionals like the ones you coach react under stress. We have essentially been re-performing John Bowlby's attachment theory experiments. We've been doing that for 20 years with 25,000 people, professionals like the ones you coach across US and Canada. And what we've learned is that, unsurprisingly, that humans respond in unique and complex ways to conflict, like the ones you just experienced. We created that brief video just for you to give you a sense of what does it feel like? How do I narrate my experience of a conflict? Well, that's what we've been doing for 20 years. And what we found is, 25,000 people can experience conflict in almost 25,000 ways. And attachment theory can be a way to talk about patterns we see. And being able to spot patterns allows us to do the deep, meaningful work that we want to be doing with our clients faster, rather than responding to the issue du jour for our clients. So what we see, these patterns that we come up are avoidant, anxious, and what we're calling dissociative. Now, you'll notice secure attachment is missing, and it's because it turns out we've yet to see the perfectly securely attached human. I don't have to tell you that if you've been coaching for a while or been an employee and given someone else feedback, or like, humans don't respond perfectly to stress or change or feedback, right? We tend to respond in some kind of way that reflects either an avoidant pattern or an anxious pattern or a dissociative pattern. And it shows up either from a little tiny bit and it's hard to detect, or a lot and it's not hard to detect. And so we've taken what would be that securely attached and we've parsed it into one of these 3 patterns. You'll also notice the fearful pattern is missing. And that's because the fearful fragmented pattern, one, they tend not to be able to overcome the challenges associated with that and reach to a level of success in life to get coaching. And they're more likely to get something more like therapy. And there tends not to be a pattern, right? The pattern is that there isn't a pattern. They'll serially try various patterns to see what works. So for each pattern, I'll be sharing now the internal experience of the pattern, the external experience of the pattern, and how you can detect it in the narrative and the issues, and the coaching challenge, what kind of makes that pattern tricky. And then I'll talk about how to coach it. So I'm going to invite you to think about a specific client, like maybe one that's given you a little trouble, or one that's a little stuck, or maybe one that you feel stuck on. Anyway, just keep a client in mind. And then listen to the description of the patterns that I'm going to provide, and how these people with these patterns relate to what they bring to coaching and how they narrate it. And you may detect an underlying pattern that flows through all your coaching conversations with this client. Okay. So we're going to start with avoidant. So this is what's going on inside the pattern, inside the person that you may not be able to see. So the focus of an avoidant pattern is actually outside themselves on what's not working and what's at risk. And I'll tease that out even a little bit further. The feelings will tend to be more of frustration, because why? I mean, my focus is outside and I'm wanting something outside of me to be a certain way or meet my expectations. And how often does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen very often. And what am I? I feel angry or frustrated. So those go together. And the way this person will tend to relate is very independently. They'll want to figure things out themselves. They may do well in like a hierarchical structure. They may report up well. They may report down well. They'll tend to have trouble collaborating because they want to act independently. So how you might detect this pattern is the issues they bring tend to be about the problem or the issue that's outside of them. The focus is on the staff, the boss, the economy. It's outside them. And the way they'll narrate it is also very outside of them. They don't understand. He doesn't respect me. This is an impossible environment. All of that is narrative about what's outside of them. You don't tend to have them narrate what is happening inside them. So in summary, the focus of the avoidant pattern is something needing to change, and that thing that needs to change is not them. So when you ask them about themselves, they'll tend to respond with something else. Like I had a client who reported to, she was the chief marketing officer and reported to the CEO. And I coached both of them. And I'd show up for a coaching session. I'd say, I'll call her Betty. Betty, how are you? And she'd say, you wouldn't believe what Bill, we'll call Bill the CEO, Bill did. He's micromanaging here and he's leaving me out of this important meeting over here. And I'll say, yeah, but Betty, how are you? Oh, you wouldn't believe what Bill did. He did this and this and this. And I'm like, well, I'm noticing, Betty, that I'm asking you about you and you're telling me about Bill. Right. And so the avoidant patterns can be challenging to coach in I don't know if it's called a traditional coaching way. I'm not sure what traditional coaching means. But if we think about coaching being about coaching the person and not the problem, then that can be challenging because their focus is so much on the problem. They aren't so much seeking another way of looking at something. They're more wanting whatever they're looking at to change. So the coaching challenge for us is coaching the person and not the problem. You hear that all the time. There's a book by Marshall Reynolds called Coach the Person, Not the Problem. And this is a trap that we coaches can get into, is because we have these clients whose focus is outside themselves. And when we ask questions about them, they deflect to outside. And so we start coaching the problem, right? And so the challenge is keeping the focus on the client and what's happening inside of them, and returning to questions they don't answer, and meeting them where they are while not necessarily buying into their interpretations. So the anxious attachment pattern. So this is what's happening on the inside of the anxious pattern. So, and it looks like the opposite of the avoidant. The focus is too much in here to the exclusion of out there. And the focus in here isn't a selfish kind of focus. It's a, let me see how I can support all the people around me, and take on, unknowingly take on a whole bunch of responsibility. Because if I take on this person's responsibility and this person's responsibility in addition to mine, then I'll stay in relationship with them, because I fear loss of relationship. And my feelings won't be more toward anger, because anger can lose the relationship. It'll be more toward shame or guilt and the finger pointing inward. And the way I'll tend to relate to people as with an anxious pattern is to accommodate, to defer, to put myself last, not wanting to risk disconnection. And the issues that the anxious pattern shows up with, there's a lot of overwhelm. Not that every client can't show up with overwhelm. They can. And, this pattern will overwhelm from saying yes to things. Like it is as if they have gotten themselves into the overwhelm, but feel they have, like, they can't see how they could not have taken on all this responsibility. They'll say they can't delegate to anyone, and they'll stay in intolerable situations for a long time until they can't tolerate it anymore, and they'll leave. And their narrative will be like, I can't say no. I must be the one to do this. My team's as busy as I am. I don't want anyone else to suffer. And what's underneath this is that they're not really valuing themselves. And they'll see that it's right for them not to value themselves. And what can make coaching this pattern tricky is us buying into their belief that they don't have any options, and hearing all the responsibility they're taking as awesome self-agency and thinking that's somehow a good thing instead of just a lack of boundaries. And then finally, to the dissociative pattern, what's going on here is there's this is less related to attachment and more related to a past trauma. And the reaction to some kind of past trauma is to be almost rigidly positive, almost rigidly optimistic. The feelings, they'll tend to step over their own distress and the distress of others. They'll be kind of silver liners. They aren't able to be with the stress of distressing feelings themselves or others. They'll tend to over collaborate to the point of exhaustion. And so the issues, see, this pattern tends not to get coaching because why? Everything's great. Everything's great all the time. They'll get coaching that's more remedial because they've missed the details. They've missed what's not working. They've missed what's not great. And they've stepped over their distress and others' distress enough that they've lost trust in the trust of their team or trust of their boss. And so the coaching challenge here is buying into their rosy view of how everything is, seeing everything as positive, as being the right way to be. Positive is right? It's right. It's not always. And seeing their extensive collaboration as being a good thing. Oh, look at them. They're so positive and they're so collaborative that we can be over positive and over collaborative. So we've talked now about how to detect those patterns in their narrative and the challenge of coaching each. What we're going to talk about next is how we coach our clients relative to those patterns. So we've just got a bit of time, but let me stop and Jeff see how this is landing. If there's a question that comes up that encapsulates things.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think there's a lot of chatter and a lot of responses and a lot of thinking that's going on. So all of that is great. But I have to say, I think we need to address a question that comes up, and it's not surprising to me, but it's being phrased 5 or 6 different ways, which is that there is sort of a past-focused orientation in what you're talking about. And that brings up questions for people about whether or not we're sliding into a therapeutic domain. And then how do we maintain an ethical stance as coaches? Is it appropriate for us to be looking at past patterns? Does that take us too far into what we would call therapy? I think it'd be good for you to address that.
Thanks so much for bringing that up. So these are not past patterns. These are patterns showing up today in the lives of clients and how they're relating to their lives and others and how they're narrating that relationship. It's happening today. It was formed in the past, as all of us humans are formed in the past, right? And it's happening today. And most of our clients don't have some form of pathology around their pattern, and they still have a pattern. You have a pattern, I have a pattern, we all have a pattern. And the pattern can be coachable. It doesn't require therapy.
And does it require you to go into their past? Because that
No.
always comes up from an ICF standpoint, that we are focused on the future and not the past.
Yeah. So we are not focused on the client's past. We don't ever have to ask them a word about any past ever, because we can discern their pattern from their present day narrative. I'm slowing down because that's a really important point. We coaches get freaked out, in my opinion, oftentimes about like, oh, we're all shaped by the past, and that past shows up in the present, and we're always narrating it, and the narration of it happens today. And so that's obviously, I'm on the faculty of narrative coaching. I'm all about working with narrative, and the narratives are shaped by the past, and it's how our narratives reflect, all right, how we are identifying and relating to ourselves. So yeah, no, not about delving into the past in any way.
So this is great, Alison. I think you're doing a wonderful job of being clear about the distinctions, but the questions keep coming. So Deborah is asking, how do we avoid heading into diagnosis?
Oh, you don't need any diagnosis. There's no diagnosis required. Well, you'll see, when we talk about the avoidant pattern, if a client shows up and is talking about, oh, my boss this and the problem's this, is there a diagnosis there? No, the locus of control is outside of themselves. That's a very common thing you hear in coaching, of where's the locus of control. There's no diagnosing happening. There's no therapy happening. There's no assumed pathology. Yeah.
But what you are pointing to, though, is supporting coaches to become aware that these narratives may be running the show inside ourselves and inside our clients.
The narratives are absolutely running the show, right? And narratives is just another way to say, and all of us humans have a narrator inside. It's the voice that says, this is what's happening, and this is who I am, this is who the other person is, right? We all have these narratives. And it's that, and we are always offering our narratives in a coaching conversation, both coach and client. And so, yes, those narratives reflect the way in which we're relating to our lives. And when I'm talking about my narrative shows I'm out there and out there and out there and out there. It shows I'm relating to my life by giving control to everything outside of me in order for me to be okay. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for those clarifications.
Yeah.
I mean, I think,
that's an important point.
yeah. And I think maybe in the last few minutes, it would be great for you to share a little bit about how you recommend, maybe giving some tips for people around how to coach these kinds of patterns.
Yeah. So how we coach the patterns is directly connected to how the pattern formed. So the way an avoidant pattern formed is their caregiver may not have been attentive to the emotional needs of the child. They didn't support the child's exploration of their self, the self inside. And so the child kind of learned that what's inside wasn't important. So they turned to focus outside, and all this happens non-consciously. So here's the example. This is a client I've worked with for many years. Has a strong avoidant pattern. He's smart, capable, driven, and his focus is outside of himself. It's like, why can't these people just do their jobs? This generation is entitled. There's nobody strong enough at the junior level. It's always focused on the problem. So my coach approach with him is I pay attention and mirror and validate his feelings, even if he doesn't, to help him reconnect with himself. I focus on what he wants and what he feels and what gives him joy. I'm prioritizing his internal experience when he's not. I'm literally returning him to himself. And I do that by acknowledging him and reminding him of his successes, focusing him on his own joy, and helping clarify what he can control and what he can't, what he can change and what he can't, right? Because everything's out here, and there's not much out here, a lot out there you can't control. So that ends up being helpful. The anxious pattern formed perhaps because the child's parent or caregiver was anxious, or inconsistently available, and that kept the child from exploring their own independence. And so kind of exploration and separation was not encouraged. So the child learned that relationships are really important and to fear their own disconnection at their own cost. And a way to work, an example of a client I've had that had a strong anxious attachment was she was bright, resourceful, hardworking, head of marketing for a company. And the CEO would routinely call her on nights and weekends and ask her to work nights and weekends. She would perpetually say yes to everything. She'd make up a story that she really wanted to do this work and she wanted to make the company successful. And that is all true. And what was more true after working with her for a long time was she was deathly afraid of drawing a boundary that was healthy for her for fear of losing the relationship. So here, the coaching or the coach approach is to ask that anxious person who's taken on everything and said yes to everything and says they have to, is what is this costing you? What's it costing your relationships? What part of yourself are you not listening to? And to the person who has challenges with boundaries, this next question may be the most important. Where does your responsibility end? That stops people in their tracks often, and then gets them to understand actually what a boundary might be. And then helping them realize that, oh, you can draw a boundary, which is being able to say what's okay and what's not okay, and maintain a relationship. The two can be true. And finally, the dissociative pattern is a pattern that's formed through some degree of little t or big T trauma. And the way they learn to cope with it is by dissociating or distancing themselves from their own distress. And so how to coach it is actually different than one might think. It's actually to support them in seeing risks and paying more attention to their eyes than their smile, because their eyes have a harder time dissociating from the distress than the smile on their face. And then if and when they're ready, and you only do what you're qualified to do, it helps them be with the distress that's already in their bodies and find a safe way to experience it. So, and we created this little guide of how to coach a client's patterns, and that's at learninginaction.com/IOC webinar. Okay. And as always, if you want to learn more about all of this very rich topic, join us for this series. Okay, Jeff, what do you want to do here at the end?
Well, first of all, I'd love to have one more quick question, because I love this question, and I was kind of sitting with it myself. So Ginger is asking, is it possible to be a combination of all the patterns?
The avoidant and the anxious are opposite patterns, and I don't see them blending in my experience. However, the dissociative pattern can lean toward other focused or can lean toward self-focused, but that's not the dominant issue with that pattern. That's not what is causing them challenges in their life. It's that they're glossing over the distress.
Got it. Okay. The other thing folks are asking is if you might give us a quick interpretive interpretation for the document that they did for the worksheet.
Yeah, okay, let's look it up. Yeah, okay. So, sorry, we ran out of time. So here, the dealio is, if you look at all the sentences that you wrote out and you identify them as either self-focused or other-focused or positive or negative. So for instance, if you said something, I feel like this is for the best, I must have done something wrong, I'm going to figure this out, those are all self-focused. And if you said something like, he's being dismissive, I don't like how he's doing this, he's trying to be sensitive, whatever it is, those are other focused, right? And so the other focused statements are more avoidant, the self-focused statements are more anxious. And then in terms of positive and negative, I feel like this is for the best, I'm going to figure how to fix this, he's trying to be sensitive, that's all really positive. And if all your comments are really positive, that could tell you something. And if all your comments are really negative, that will tell you something. Okay, and you can kind of trace those self-positive, other positive, self-negative, other, just back to the model. Yeah.
Wow. That is so amazing. Just in that short little vignette that we think about how we get triggered and how we are responding in our bodies, how we're responding emotionally. And if we can become aware and actually self-observe, we can become aware of our own patterns. And then we can become so much more sensitized to who we are in our narrative, and then have that kind of empathy and awareness for our clients. It's super powerful. So, Alison, I just want to thank you. I know we were running out of time. We ran out of time, and this is just a super important topic for all of us as coaches to become more aware of these kinds of narrative-driven patterns. And you mentioned David Drake. He's one of our thought leaders at the Institute, and I would encourage anyone who wants to take another deeper dive to read some of the work that David's done. And on our website, there's a video with David. But I mostly just want to encourage you. I know a couple of people made comments that we were doing this as a teaser. And to a certain extent, I hope you will see that this was more than a teaser. It was actually a very content-focused webinar. But, this is a really big step that we're taking at the Institute. We've had requests to do more than just webinars, to actually offer live seminars where people, our coaches, our members can take a deeper dive in some of these topics. And so I'm just really excited that Alison has stepped up and offered to do a series starting in January. And there's information about it here on the screen, but also on our website. And, it's just really an opportunity for you to take a deeper dive, to work more closely with Alison. And as she said, it's going to include sessions with content and also lots of wonderful practice. And this is really what it's all about at the Institute, for us to take the good science that exists around these kinds of themes and put it to practice. So I'm really excited that we're able to begin to offer these live seminars. And I hope that you folks that joined us today will take advantage of it. And mostly, I just want to thank Alison for being such an incredible support of the Institute and such a thought leader in this space.
Thank you so much. And a couple of people asking the dates in January, and I don't have them right in front of me, but there are 6 dates in January. If you go to the IOC website, you'll see them all there. There are live groups and discussion groups. Make sure you check both buttons. There's 6 sessions. Really hope you join us.
Yeah, I think it goes January, February, March, right?
Yeah.
For 3 months. So, but you can learn all about it on our website, and don't hesitate to write to me or to Alison or to Sue. We're happy to respond. So anyway, I want to thank you again, Alison. We'll see you again very soon.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we have another webinar next week, so check it out. We're going to be doing traumatic growth with Richard Tedeschi, another really exciting topic that is super relevant for us as coaches. So we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.